Thanks very much, Richard. A question from this gentleman.
Yeah, Mike Lester. I was a political reporter in this state for about 20 odd years, from 1982 through to 98, and I worked for Jamaican for 4 years after that, so excuse the political bias. But I will ask you a question, but first of all, Kate, I just sort of take umbrage with your statement that a Liberal-Green outcome is the most likely outcome of the next election. I don't think that's right.
No, I didn't say that.
You did say that, I wrote it down.
I said that's what the poll, I'll come back to that point, it's what the polls suggested.
But the polls actually suggest that a minority government is going to happen, but the most likely outcome actually is a Labor minority government.
Okay.
Because of our constitution and because of the history of Tasmania. And Richard agrees with me on this.
Yeah.
Okay, but anyway, putting that point aside, Richard, I just want to ask you, do you believe that Tasmania should abandon representative government, or should we and go to a more participatory model, or should we actually stick with what has actually worked for about 100 years? And secondly, should we, if we do abandon that, and we do have a more power sharing arrangement, then should we actually have a situation where we abandon the principle of joint ministerial responsibility, or should, therefore, so that anybody who is actually in cabinet and agreeing to a policy change is committed to that policy change, or should we have a situation where each person in the cabinet is able to go out and disagree with the final result?
Richard.
Well, there's an awful lot in that, Mike, and one is I set up the Australasian Study of Parliament group, which is all the parliaments of Australasia, because I believe in the Westminster system. I have a lot of strength. But I've renovated 3 houses now in my life. Every once in a while you do need to work on the architecture. And I'm quite happy to say that, for example, in Margaret's case, she raised questions of how power can be shared in a majority government. One of the things that I've advocated for a long time, as I think parliamentary committees ought to be committees that take on issues before parties have taken positions, to give the public more opportunity to have a say before parties have actually adopted. I think that's a change in the architecture that can make them more open, more receptive, and it's not power sharing, it's the people just asserting their own power and using it in order to make sure they're represented. And people do forget, by the way, that every member of Parliament represents exactly the same number of people. The Greens don't represent any less, a Green representative doesn't represent any less than a Labour representative or a Liberal. They all have the same quotas. On the question of cabinet solidarity, well, it is an important part of holding governments accountable, without a doubt. But we look at what Mike ran, and I'm not talking about recent things, well, we look at Mike ran, and he's kept the National Party and an independent in his, and they have the right to disagree on some issues with cabinet. They can't go outside of cabinet and bag cabinet, but they have a right to disagree with some cabinet decisions as part of their involvement as ministers. So, I mean, there are things that can be done. Broadly speaking, I like the Westminster system. I don't see the difference that you're trying to draw between representative democracy and participatory democracy. I think people participate by getting representatives who represent them. That's
the point I'm trying to make is that, I don't want to make a speech, but the issue is that the governments actually have to make decisions that are unpopular very often, and sometimes it's easy for the party that is not the majority party to walk away from the hard decisions and not accept but take credit for the easy decisions. So I think that
it can be the case.
Sure. You need some way of making sure that people actually stick within, actually back the hard decisions that governments actually have to make.
Thanks, Michael.
But
Richard.
yeah, on that one, I mean, I guess the best example of the point you're making was in fact a informal arrangement, that was the Labour Green Accord, where the Greens did back Michael Field to restructure the budget. And he did it so successfully against Green interests and against Labour interests. They both behaved with incredible integrity throughout that process.
No follow-up, sorry. You have to do it outside.
I know that.
No, I'm sorry. I stipulated that at the outset because I knew this would happen.
No, sorry. Labour certainly does take a different view of it, but the fact is, the record is clear. They did it. Michael Field got a, was it commander or major award for the results of his government for it. And,
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
So all I'm saying is-
We can have that debate outside. I know there's a lot of people waiting, and I'll go across the room.
Oh, hi, Cassie O'Connor here from the Greens. I love Margaret's notion of the round tables within Parliament. I really want to think about who you sat at a table with, but I'm interested to find out from Richard particularly whether, because of the way the Westminster system works, and it is by nature quite adversarial, how you get around that. That's my first question. And the second one is, Parliament's clearly too small. Numbers are a real issue. Do you think there's more capacity for a cooperative Parliament if you have more talent in there, more people, the power's spread out more?
Could perhaps Margaret address the first one about the physical appearance of government, and then perhaps Richard follow up the one about the size of Tasmania's Parliament, if that's okay?
Sorry, I was talking to
Yes, I know, sorry.
I guess that the party discipline in not necessarily just Tasmania, but in Australia, is absolutely out of step with everything that we're talking about. I mean, you go to the Westminster system, you go to London, and you see, almost half of an entire government cross the floor and vote with the opposition on a range of issues. In Australia, that just doesn't happen. So, I mean, I think because I was not listening to Kate, as I should have been, I think that in Tasmania, I'm very critical of the estimates process. I don't think it gets the results or the information that the public wants. In fact, I've sat in on estimates and I've just been appalled at the way in which it's controlled, not by the parliamentarians, but by the bureaucracy. And that's something we haven't mentioned in terms of power sharing. I'd like to see a little less power in bureaucratic hands.
Well, I guess on the adversarial government issue, I mean, basically the Westminster system has become adversarial because of the nature of having something that's dear to Greg's heart. We're a monarchy, and we have to advise the Crown, and having that, there has to be an alternative government if a government falls over, so the Crown has advice. It's one of the tenets of that arrangement. So it's there. And it's part of that architecture, if you like, because of the way we've structured our politics. If we had a different system, we could probably have it less adversarial. Size is an important part of it, because I don't know that we'll ever be able to do what Margaret says completely, although I think it's a major part of the problem at the moment, and that is there are far too many people who are, in effect, courtiers to MPs, whose jobs depend on their MP being re-elected, and they're willing to do anything to get it done. And size wouldn't necessarily change that, but what size can do is allow the committee systems, again, to have this capacity to be staffed. We can do other things that I wanted to mention was Greg's point about the Human Rights Act. Human Rights Acts are what parliaments do to re-empower the people to use the courts to get at the executive through another means. When the executive overuses its power, Parliament doesn't always, or isn't always able to tackle it because the executive controls the Parliament in majority cases. Human Rights Acts provide a vehicle for another arm of government, but it's the Parliament that empowers the people, or re-empowers the people to use that by going through the courts. So these are things that can be done. But remember, our judicial system, and I think both Greg and Jim would jump on me if I didn't mention, are adversarially based. We don't have the European inquisitive approach. We have an adversarial one, and to some extent, I guess it's the political system is an extension of that as well.
Okay, we just have, before the next question down the front here, we've got a comment from Jim.